Hi there, this is Professor York again. I am going to be covering part 2 of our market sizing and competitive assessment lecture. And this is going to focus in on competitive assessment and competition. So let's get into it. First of all, when we think about competition, as you remember from previous lectures in terms of resources you can find that are secondary, there are various secondary sources that you can find both in the library but also on the internet. For instance, you can go to company websites, which is fast, easy, and free. But the problem is that the information you get is filtered and is biased. But you can get information such as the Financial Information Management Team, product service data, and press releases. One of the things that you should really be aware of when you do look at company information is to look for the financial reports, particularly the 10K report, which ties to the annual report, because that will give you some valuable insight, especially from the financial standpoint and also around the management team. Financial analysts that are in the industry are very, very important because they'll provide detailed financial information. Unfortunately, these reports can be expensive, but they will give you key revenue, profit, and financial analyses as well. Industry analysts are very useful reports, and many of the investment houses will have analysts, and you can get this from, for instance, IBIS World or EMIS as two portals that do have access. Sometimes Hoover's will have access. And they're very credible because of third party. Unfortunately, sometimes by the time you get these reports, they're out of date. And if you do get these reports, sometimes they're expensive because they're not necessarily accessible to the public. Sometimes you can play the student card and be able to get this. But what we're looking for is an industry analysis, reports, and comparison of firms. Then there are trade publications. Trade publications are great, especially if you get involved, as I mentioned in my previous lecture, with trade organizations. Fast, easy, free. However, they may talk about the industry in general and may have limited info on individual companies, but they may give industry performance, events, and trends. And then you get into the web, and this is which is really cool, is web traffic analysis, looking at your customers, your competition's website. Very fast, but some services do require fees. Okay, Alexa is one that is a very good site to check out, and you're looking for web traffic over time. But one of the key things that we want to think about is keywords, because especially when you're trying to compete for Google keywords and paid advertising, there's competition for keywords, and you want to know what your competitors are using, what's popular, see if you can be able to create keyword strings that will allow your website or your content to appear in the first page and hopefully in the first 6 listings in a search engine report. And then there's social media analysis, which again is fast, easy, and free, but it does require a lot of filtering. To looking for, and there's software that's out there, a variety of tools that can help you in terms of mentions and channels, hashtags, keywords, and top users. So just wanted to mention real quick some key tools to think about. I mentioned Alexa.com, Complete.com, and then ultimately I find that Google has actually changed it in terms of their overall analytics capabilities, but Google Alerts and Trends are very, very useful as well. So when we think about competitive analysis, we have to think about our direct competitors and our indirect competitors. Our indirect competitors fulfill the same function, but may do something that appears differently. For instance, I can drive a car to work, or I can take public transportation. So that's an indirect competition. And what you'll find is that prices will vary widely. And I used the example here of BART Transit versus taxi or Uber. But direct competitions are your rivals in your market space, and they offer the similar products and services in the same market. In other words, taxi cabs versus taxi cab versus Uber, or Uber drivers competing against each other. So that sort of gives you a feel for some of these things. Issues to consider when we are thinking about direct, okay, is the time horizon in terms of the time in which a competitor will pose a substantial. Is it immediate or is it intermediate in terms of 6 months to 12 months, or is it 12 months and further? Will it be product and service life cycle? So consider where your product life cycle is. And then think about the rate of technology change, especially when we have in high-tech products like phones, for instance. By the time you buy your phone, it's outdated within 6 months. So it's very important to think about that. And then also a lot of good analytic work can be done using frameworks. And I'm going to cover a few frameworks that are very useful in terms of presenting how you stack up versus various drivers. The first one is Michael Porter's 5 Forces. And Michael Porter's 5 Forces deal with specifically what we should be thinking about is not just the buying power of customers and the power of the suppliers, but in specific to competition is the rivalry factors among existing firms, but also the threat of new entrants that are coming in. And last but not least is the substitute products, as I talked about previously in terms of indirect competition. So it's not just today, but what's in the pipeline that may come in and displace you. It could be direct competition, or it could be disruptive competition, such as what Uber did to the taxi industry. Another way of being able to present and use as a framework for presenting competition is what we call a competitive grid, where you list out basically some of the key competitors that are there, and then some of the key features or benefits or value propositions. What is important, and I think is important, is note that actually your company should actually be in the first column. And actually the emphasis should not necessarily be on features, but should actually be on your benefits or your value proposition. You can also use perceptual maps, such as in this one. This is actually, I know a number of venture capitalists who tend to prefer this because it really focuses on a variety of things. Perceptual maps allow us to look at clustering, look at where open space is, etc. Look at areas that really present opportunity, especially when we look at either a mix of features or we look at customer value propositions or benefits. So this is one that can be very useful and one to consider as well. And then there is pro-con. You tend to see this in we'll say, more heavy scientific markets, such as in pharmaceuticals. And in this case, you may have a listing of drugs and pro and con, indication and price is just in this example. This tends to get very heavy. You tend to see this maybe more in marketing plans and as backup, but in terms of high-level presentations, you probably will see more like the previous two frameworks. And then last but not least is when we think about competition, think about putting it into what we call the universal selling proposition, or you call this a positioning statement. And believe it or not, if you look at the pieces that are within the USP, this is very much what a 60-second or 30-second pitch should be able to contain. For instance, for whom, which you should know always, who is your customer that you're targeting, who has a particular need or problem, which we've talked about previously from the interviewing side, and that our product includes these core features. So what is that your product is offering that do something to solve the customer problem, which is your value proposition, unlike the competition. And then last but not least, which all investors want to know, is what is your competitive advantage? What are you doing differently? And it gets to the last concept here, which deals with competitive intelligence, which when you do your research relative to your competition, it's about making your company more competitive. And so when you're looking at your competitors, you want to know, what did they do to achieve success? What can you learn from them? What gaps exist? What customers were not served or served well, because that could be an opportunity? And what at the end of the day is your competitive advantage, because you will always be asked that. So closing out, This is the Learn by Doing assignment. That's next week. This should be a good way of being able to utilize the tools and the portals at the Kennedy Library. And we have here 2 assignments as you look at your particular market area, which you can look at market sizing, especially as you focus down on a target market, and also in terms of the competitors and how there might be a need in the marketplace. Okay, and that you could be able to exploit that need in terms of a particular niche which your product could offer as a competitive advantage. Okay, look forward. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out.